Hi, I'm Emily. I'll be your storyteller today. Many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Also, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now get comfortable. Close your eyes and let the sound of the rain guide you into the story. The insistent drumming of rain against the vast plate glass facade of the Veridian gallery was a familiar sound, a constant melancholic counterpoint to the sterile silence within its walls after hours. As the newly appointed assistant curator, my evenings, and often my nights, were spent here, overseeing the intricate, often temperamental final installations for Perceptions, our most ambitious and arguably most controversial contemporary art exhibit to date. The city outside glittered, a distant, indifferent jewel in the rain-swept darkness. Inside, the Veridian was a stark labyrinth of white cubes, minimalist spaces designed to provoke thought, to challenge, to unsettle. During the day, it buzzed with the hushed reverence of art patrons, the critical murmur of academics, the excited chatter of students. But at night, it transformed. The silence became profound, almost sepulchral, broken only by the faint hum of climate control systems and the occasional inexplicable creak of the building settling around me. It was a silence that invited introspection. But also, I was beginning to learn a certain unease. The Perceptions exhibit itself was a challenging collection, a deep dive into the fractured landscapes of trauma, memory, and distorted reality. It featured immersive video installations that played with sensory input, kinetic sculptures that shifted and reformed with an almost organic fluidity, and interactive pieces that seemed to respond not just to movement, but to the viewer's very emotional state. It was groundbreaking, provocative, and, as whispered rumors among the gallery staff suggested, perhaps a little unsettling in its own right, even before the public had seen it. Tonight, my task was to finalize the lighting on a particularly complex piece by the enigmatic lead artist, a reclusive figure known only as Miroir. The sculpture, a series of polished obsidian-like shards suspended in a delicate, almost invisible web, was designed to reflect and distort the viewer's image in 1,000 fragmented ways. It was beautiful, yes, but also profoundly disquieting. Like looking into a shattered soul, the rain outside seemed to intensify, its rhythm a restless, anxious pulse. As I adjusted a spotlight, ensuring the light caught the obsidian shards at precisely the right angle to maximize their disturbing refractions, I had the distinct, prickling sensation of being watched. I glanced around the vast, empty hall, its white walls receding into deep pools of shadow beyond the focused beams of my work lights. Nothing. Only the silent, impassive forms of other installations, their own strange narratives held in suspended animation, waiting for an audience. I dismissed the feeling, attributing it to the late hour, the inherent eeriness of the exhibit's themes, the solitude. Yet as I returned to my task, the sensation lingered, a cold spot between my shoulder blades, an unseen gaze that I couldn't quite shake. The gallery, usually a place of intellectual stimulation, of aesthetic appreciation, suddenly felt different, alert, aware. The silence was no longer empty, it was expectant. Later, while reviewing the security camera feeds in the small, brightly lit control room, a habit I had developed more for distraction than any real concern, I noticed it. On Monitor 7, displaying the long, deserted corridor leading to the new wing, a flicker, a brief, almost subliminal distortion in the image, like a heat haze, or a shadow detaching itself from a deeper darkness, too quick, too indistinct to be certain. I replayed the footage. Nothing. A technical glitch, perhaps, in the gallery's state-of-the-art system, but the image, or the memory of it, stayed with me, adding another layer to my growing unease. The building, with its stark geometries and its carefully curated silences, seemed to be holding its breath. I found myself listening intently for any sound beyond the monotonous hum of the climate control and the ceaseless weeping lament of the rain against the glass. My senses preternaturally sharpened, my nerves stretched taut. It was then that I noticed the kinetic sculpture again, the one by Miroir, the one I had so meticulously lit hours before. One of the smaller obsidian shards, one I was certain had been angled slightly downwards, now pointed almost directly towards where I had been standing. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift in its complex configuration. Had I bumped it? Had a vibration from a passing truck outside caused it to move? Or had it adjusted itself? The thought was absurd, a product of fatigue and an overactive imagination, fueled by the exhibit's own unsettling themes. Sculptures did not move on their own. Yet, the certainty that it had shifted, however minutely, lodged in my mind like a sliver of ice. I approached it cautiously, my flashlight beam playing over its polished, light-absorbing surfaces. It remained, perfectly still now, its obsidian shards reflecting 1,000 fragmented, distorted images of myself, watching me from a multitude of angles. A sudden chime from my pocket made me jump. It was a message from Mr. Julian Thorne, the gallery's charismatic director. "Sophia, my dear, trust all is proceeding smoothly with the perception's final touches? Do try not to let Miroir's more challenging pieces unnerve you. Art should provoke, after all. Don't stay too late. The gallery has a way of lingering in the mind after dark." His tone was light, almost playful, yet his words, given my current state, felt less like reassurance and more like a veiled, knowing acknowledgement. "All fine here, Mr. Thorne," I typed back, my fingers fumbling slightly on the small keypad, just ensuring every shadow falls perfectly. I omitted any mention of the shifted sculpture, the flickering monitor, the oppressive feeling of being watched. How could I articulate such vague, irrational fears without sounding unprofessional, or worse, unhinged? He was right. Art, especially this art, was designed to provoke. I was likely just succumbing to its power. His reply was swift. "Excellent. The press preview is critical. We need perceptions to be flawless, an experience they won't soon forget." There was a subtle emphasis on the word experience that I couldn't quite decipher, a hint of something beyond mere aesthetic appreciation. "Good night, Sophia, and do remember the gallery is an old soul, despite its modern facade. It has its moods." With that, his communication ceased, leaving me alone once more in the vast, silent, and increasingly unnerving space. Mr. Thorne's words, meant perhaps to be a casual, even avuncular reassurance, had the opposite effect. The gallery has a way of lingering in the mind after dark. It has its moods. These were not the pronouncements of a purely pragmatic director. They hinted at an understanding, an acceptance of the Veridian's more esoteric qualities. Qualities I was now beginning to experience firsthand, with a growing, chilling intensity. I tried to return to my work, to focus on the mundane tasks of adjusting light levels, checking interactive triggers, ensuring every piece was perfectly presented for the following day's critical scrutiny, but my concentration was shattered. Every creak of the building, every sigh of the wind, every drip of rain from a leaking gutter outside, now sounded like a footstep, a whisper, a breath just beyond the edge of my hearing. the feeling of being watched was no longer subtle. It was a constant, palpable pressure. I found myself glancing repeatedly at the security monitors, half expecting to see that shadowy figure again, more clearly this time. The empty halls, the silent installations, seemed to hold a silent, collective gaze focused entirely on me, their solitary, nocturnal custodian. The stark white walls felt like the bones of some immense, unseen creature, and I was trapped within its ribcage. Then, from the heart of the Perceptions exhibit, from the wing built over the old asylum foundations, a fact I hadn't yet consciously registered, but which perhaps my subconscious was already screaming, came a sound. It was faint at first, a low, mournful sigh, almost lost in the drumming of the rain. But it grew, slowly, steadily, into a soft, undeniable sound of weeping, a sound of profound, inconsolable grief, seeming to emanate from the very heart of Miroir's challenging, soul-shattering art. My blood ran cold. This was no art installations, programmed soundscape. This was raw, human sorrow, echoing through the empty, sterile halls of the Veridian gallery, a sound that had no place here, yet felt terrifyingly, undeniably real. The rain outside intensified, lashing against the glass like angry spectral hands, and the lights in the corridor leading to the Perceptions exhibit flickered violently, then plunged into an utter, suffocating darkness. The weeping continued, closer now, more personal, as if the source of that terrible grief was moving, seeking me out in the sudden, storm-racked blackness. My meticulously planned night watch, my professional duties as an assistant curator, had just dissolved into a primal, terrifying confrontation with an unknown, unseen, and deeply sorrowful presence. The Veridian gallery had indeed begun to reveal its moods, and its first chilling whisper was one of profound, unutterable despair. The sound of weeping from the darkened Perceptions wing, followed by the abrupt blackout, had shaken me to my core. Though Mr. Thorne had attributed it to a minor electrical fault and the highly suggestive nature of Miroir's soundscapes, when I'd nervously reported it the next morning, his explanation felt thin, dismissive. The gallery, once a place of cool, intellectual beauty, now hummed with a dissonant undercurrent of dread for me, especially as the relentless autumn rain continued to sheet against its vast, unblinking windows. My nights were now spent in a state of heightened, almost feverish vigilance. I found myself obsessively replaying the security footage from the Perceptions wing, searching for any tangible evidence of what I had experienced. The fleeting shadows I had once dismissed as glitches now seemed more deliberate, lingering, a fraction of a second longer at the edge of empty doorways, their forms subtly, unnervingly, almost human-like before dissolving back into the ambient gloom of the white cube spaces. My paranoia, if that's what it was, began to focus on the artworks themselves. Miroir's pieces, designed to challenge perception, now felt actively hostile, their silent presence a constant, unnerving scrutiny. The obsidian shards of the kinetic sculpture seemed to follow my movements as I passed, their angles subtly shifting, their polished surfaces reflecting not just my fragmented image, but also a disturbing, almost predatory gleam from the galleries, carefully aimed spotlights. It was while calibrating the audio for a piece titled Echo Chamber, an installation designed to capture and distort ambient sound into unsettling, abstract compositions, that I first heard them with undeniable clarity. Faint, sibilant whispers, like dry leaves skittering across cold stone, began to weave themselves into the artwork's intended soundscape. They were not part of the programmed audio. I checked the source files meticulously, These were extraneous, intrusive, and chillingly articulate, though I could not yet decipher their words. I recorded these spectral additions, my sound engineer's instincts battling with a rising tide of primal fear. Played back, amplified, filtered, the whispers revealed themselves as fragmented laments, sorrowful sighs, and occasionally what sounded like soft, pained cries. It was as if the very air in that wing, saturated with the psychic residue of Miroir's traumatic themes, was being given voice through the artwork's sensitive microphones, the gallery itself sighing out its hidden griefs. The interactive installations became even more unnerving. One piece, Reflexive Gaze, consisted of a series of polished steel panels that were supposed to ripple and distort light patterns in response to a viewer's proximity and movement. Now, it would activate when I was perfectly still, across the room, its panels shimmering and contorting as if reacting to an unseen presence beside me, or perhaps to my own escalating fear, which it seemed to sense, to feed upon. Another installation, a darkened room where pinpricks of light were meant to slowly coalesce into abstract, comforting nebulas based on the viewer's calm breathing patterns, now did the opposite for me. The moment I entered, the lights would flare erratically, forming sharp, angular, almost menacing constellations, the air growing colder, the gentle ambient soundtrack becoming distorted, discordant. It felt like a personal rejection, a deliberate, hostile response to my presence, driven by the growing certainty that the source of these disturbances lay within the art itself, or perhaps within its enigmatic creator, Miroir. I began to research them obsessively during my daylight hours. Information was scarce. Miroir was a recluse, their identity shrouded in mystery, their public statements rare and invariably cryptic, filled with pronouncements about art as a conduit for unseen energies and the canvas of the subconscious. I unearthed obscure academic critiques and forgotten art forum discussions that hinted at Miroir's obsessive methods, their insistence on working in complete isolation for months on end, their fascination with sites of historical trauma, which, they claimed, held a unique resonant frequency. Some critics lauded their work as a profound exploration of the human psyche. Others dismissed it as morbid, exploitative, even dangerous in its psychological intensity. One article chillingly referred to Miroir's installations as psychic traps. The more I learned about Miroir, the more uneasy I became about the perceptions exhibit. It was not just a collection of challenging artworks. It felt like a meticulously crafted instrument, designed to attune its viewers, or perhaps the space itself, to something deeply unsettling, something that lay just beyond the veil of normal human experience. The gallery, with its stark white walls and controlled environment, was the perfect laboratory for such an experiment. One late night, while making my rounds through the now eerily silent Perceptions wing, I encountered one of the gallery's cleaners, an elderly woman named Agnes, her movements slow and deliberate as she polished the already gleaming floors. She rarely spoke, her presence usually as unobtrusive as the gallery's hushed atmosphere. But tonight, as I passed, she looked up, her faded blue eyes surprisingly sharp. This wing, it always feels colder than the rest, doesn't it, dear? She murmured, her voice a low, gravelly whisper. Even before these new things arrived. She gestured vaguely towards Miroir's sculptures with her polishing cloth. Some places just hold on to their sorrows, like old bones holding the chill of the grave. This gallery, it has many layers. Best not to disturb the deeper ones. Her words, so unexpected, so knowing, sent a shiver down my spine. Before I could ask what she meant, Agnes simply nodded, a faint, sad smile on her lips, and continued her methodical polishing, her silence once again absolute, leaving me to ponder her cryptic, unsettling pronouncement. She was not a curator, not an academic, but she had spent more nights in this building than anyone, a silent witness to its moods, its secrets. Her casual, almost matter-of-fact acknowledgement of the wing's sorrows was more terrifying than any overt fright. The interaction left me feeling even more isolated. If Agnes, a longtime employee, recognized the wing's inherent strangeness, yet offered no alarm, no further explanation, then perhaps these phenomena were simply an accepted, unacknowledged part of the Veridian's existence, a dark undercurrent beneath its polished, sophisticated facade. Or perhaps she too was afraid to speak more plainly. My focus returned to a particular piece by Miroir, an interactive sound sculpture titled The Listener. It consisted of a single antique wooden chair placed before a large, dark acoustic horn from which faint, almost inaudible whispers were supposed to emanate, supposedly unique to each listener. I had avoided it until now, unnerved by its implications. But tonight, drawn by a morbid curiosity, I approached it. As I sat in the chair, the silence of the gallery pressed in, broken only by the distant, mournful sigh of the rain. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a faint whisper, cold and dry, brushed against my ear from the depths of the horn. Sophia, it sighed. My name perfectly, chillingly, articulated. We perceive you. Your fear is a vibrant hue. Tell us, what do you perceive in us? I leaped from the chair as if scalded, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. This was no programmed illusion, no subtle audio trick. This was direct, intelligent communication. The artwork was not just reflecting, it was questioning, it was engaging. The whispers were not just random echoes. They were a voice, a consciousness, reaching out from within Miroir's creation. The perceptions exhibit was alive. Or rather, it was a conduit for something that was alive, something ancient, something that resided within the gallery's very foundations, now given a new, sophisticated instrument through which to perceive and interact. Miroir, with their obsessive methods and their fascination with unseen energies, had not just created art, they had opened a door. The rain outside seemed to weep in agreement, its soft patter a mournful chorus to my dawning, terrifying realization. The white cube, the pristine gallery space, was no longer a neutral container for challenging ideas. It was a baited trap, a listening chamber, and I, its solitary night watch, was its most captive, most perceptive audience. The whispers were waiting for my answer. The disembodied voice from Miroir's The Listener, my name whispered from the depths of its acoustic horn, had shattered any remaining semblance of rational explanation. The perceptions exhibit was not merely a collection of provocative art. It was a conduit, an active participant in the gallery's encroaching strangeness. My fear, once a subtle undercurrent, now thrummed with the undeniable certainty of a supernatural intelligence at play. The rain outside beat a relentless, mournful rhythm against the Veridian's vast, unblinking windows, a somber echo of my own disquiet. My focus shifted. If the art was a channel, then what was the source? Miroir's obsessive methods, their fascination with unseen energies, were undoubtedly a factor. But the sheer intensity of the phenomena, the feeling of an ancient, sorrowful presence, suggested something deeper, something tied to the gallery itself, to the very ground upon which it stood. The moods Mr. Thorne had so casually mentioned now felt like a euphemism for something far more sinister, something intrinsic to the Veridian's foundations. Driven by a desperate need to understand this underlying current, I turned my attention to the gallery's architectural history. As an assistant curator, I had access to the Veridian's extensive archives, a labyrinthine collection of blueprints, planning documents, and historical records housed in the building's temperature-controlled sub-basement. It was a place I rarely visited, preferring the clean, minimalist lines of the upper galleries. But now it felt like the only place that might hold answers. The air in the archives was cold, still, and thick with the scent of aging paper and forgotten dust. Rows upon rows of metal shelves stretched into the dim, artificially lit gloom, a silent repository of the Veridian's carefully preserved past. I began my search, poring over brittle architectural drawings of the gallery's modern construction, then delving into older maps of the city district, searching for any clue, any anomaly related to the land upon which the new West Wing, home to Perceptions, had been built. For hours, I found nothing but the mundane: zoning permits, construction, timelines, soil analysis reports. The West Wing, according to the official records, had been built on a parcel of land cleared in the early 20th century, a former industrial site of little historical note. Frustration began to set in. Was I chasing shadows again, my imagination, fueled by Miroir's unsettling art, conjuring connections where none existed? The rain seemed to mock my efforts, its distant drumming a reminder of the city's indifference. Then, tucked away in a misfiled folder containing faded 19th century city planning proposals, I found it. An older, hand-drawn map of Oakhaven, meticulously detailed, showing the city as it had been over a century and a half ago. My eyes scanned the familiar contours of the river, the old town square, and then the district where the Veridian now stood. And there, occupying the exact footprint of the West Wing, was a stark, imposing structure, labeled in spidery copperplate script: Blackwood Asylum for the Indigent Insane. A chill, colder than any draft from the gallery's efficient climate, control, snaked its way down my spine. Blackwood Asylum. The name itself was a shard of ice. I had encountered vague, almost folkloric references to it in my broader historical studies of Oakhaven, a place of profound human suffering, of cruel, experimental treatments, of countless undocumented deaths and unmourned souls. A place shut down and demolished under a cloud of scandal and public outrage in the early 1900s, its history largely erased from the city's official narrative. The Perceptions exhibit, with its themes of trauma, distorted reality, and the fragility of the human psyche, was housed directly above the unhallowed ground of this forgotten madhouse. Miroir's art, designed to provoke, to unsettle, to delve into the darkest corners of the mind, was now acting as a psychic amplifier, a sophisticated antenna drawing upon the concentrated residue of a century of pain, madness, and despair. The connection was undeniable, horrifying. Suddenly, the whispers I had heard in the audio installations, the sorrowful laments, took on a new, terrible meaning. They were not just artistic soundscapes. They were the genuine echoes of Blackwood Asylum's tormented inmates. The fleeting shadows on the security monitors were not glitches, but perhaps the spectral remnants of those who had suffered and died within its lightless walls. The very air in the West Wing felt tainted, saturated with their unreleased anguish. With this new, terrifying knowledge, I returned to the Perceptions exhibit later that night. After the gallery had officially closed, my heart a cold knot of dread. The familiar installations now seemed utterly transformed, their challenging aesthetics imbued with a profound, almost unbearable malevolence. Miroir's obsidian sculpture no longer just reflected my fragmented image. It seemed to reflect the fragmented souls of the asylum's past, their silent screams trapped within its dark, polished surfaces. The interactive video piece that had once shown me my own distorted fears now flickered with images I didn't recognize, yet felt horrifyingly familiar. Glimpses of stark padded cells, of archaic medical equipment, of faces contorted in silent, unending torment. These were not my memories. These were the memories of the ground itself, of the psychic wound upon which this gallery, this exhibit now stood, bleeding into Miroir's art, into my perception. Even the lighting, which I had so meticulously adjusted, seemed different. The shadows cast by the sculptures were longer, deeper than they should have been, stretching and contorting in unnatural ways as I moved through the silent, empty halls. They seemed to writhe with an independent life, to reach out towards me with grasping, insubstantial tendrils, the very darkness of the West Wing animated by the asylum's unquiet dead. I encountered Mr. Thorne near the entrance to the wing, his presence there at such a late hour both surprising and immediately suspect. He was admiring one of Miroir's more jarring pieces, a faint, unreadable smile on his lips. "Remarkable, isn't it, Sophia?" he murmured, without turning. How art can truly tap into the deeper resonances of a place. This wing, in particular, has always possessed a certain weight of history. His casual, almost nonchalant acknowledgement of the wing's weight of history, delivered with that same enigmatic smile, was chilling. Did he know? Did he truly understand what lay beneath the polished white floors? What spectral energies his prized exhibit was now so actively, so dangerously channeling? Or was his comment merely an aesthete's observation, oblivious to the true horror I was beginning to uncover? His ambiguity was a fresh wave of torment. "The foundations, Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "I understand this wing was built on the site of the old Blackwood Asylum." His smile didn't falter. "Indeed," he replied smoothly. "A fascinating, if tragic, chapter in Oakhaven's past. One might say Miroir's work offers a contemporary dialogue with that forgotten suffering, a way of processing its echoes." His calm, academic detachment was horrifying. As he spoke, the shadows in the corridor behind him seemed to deepen, to coalesce, and for a heart-stopping instant, I saw them. Not just elongated, distorted shadows of the sculptures, but the distinct fleeting silhouettes of hunched spectral figures, their forms flickering at the very edge of my vision, just beyond the periphery of Thorne's awareness. They were there, listening, watching, drawn by our words, by the acknowledgement of their forgotten prison. The air grew colder, the distant sound of the rain against the gallery roof seeming to transform into a chorus of faint, sorrowful sighs. The shadows cast by Miroir's kinetic sculpture, the one that had seemed to shift on its own, now began to actively lengthen and contort, its dark obsidian arms stretching across the white floor like grasping skeletal limbs, reaching towards me, towards Thorne, as if animated by an unseen, malevolent will. Mr. Thorne, seemingly oblivious, continued to speak of Miroir's artistic genius, of the exhibit's profound engagement with the architecture of the psyche. But I was no longer listening to him. My gaze was fixed on the writhing, impossible shadows, on the palpable sense of ancient, sorrowful presences stirring all around us. The foundations of fear were no longer just historical. They were alive, active, and reaching out from the very ground beneath our feet. The gallery wing, this pristine white cube dedicated to challenging perceptions, was indeed a haunted space, a psychic wound. And Miroir's art, far from merely exploring trauma, was acting as a key, a conduit, unlocking the asylum's tormented past, unleashing its forgotten horrors into the present. The press preview, the public opening, now loomed not as an artistic triumph, but as a potential catalyst for an unimaginable nightmare. The revelation that the Veridian's West Wing, home to Miroir's unsettling perceptions exhibit, stood upon the unhallowed ground of the Blackwood Asylum, had transformed my unease into a cold, pervasive dread. Mr. Thorne's calm, almost academic dismissal of the site's weight of history now felt like a deliberate, chilling obfuscation. Every shadow that writhed, every sigh of the wind through the gallery's modern facade, now seemed to carry the tormented echoes of the asylum's forgotten souls. The relentless rain outside was a constant, mournful thrum against the vast, dark windows. In the nights that followed, the general sense of a haunting presence began to coalesce, to focus its unnerving attention directly upon me. It was no longer just a feeling of being watched by the gallery at large, but a specific, intelligent scrutiny that tracked my movements, that seemed to anticipate my thoughts. Small objects on my temporary curatorial desk within the West Wing, a pen, a notepad, a discarded catalog, would be subtly shifted when my back was turned, always just enough to make me question my own memory, my own sanity. Sometimes I would find faint, almost invisible scratches on the pristine white walls near where I had been working, patterns that disturbingly resembled the strange organic glyphs I had glimpsed in the asylum research, symbols that also appeared in the more disturbing hidden layers of Miroir's own complex digital artworks. These were not accidental marks. They were communications, territorial assertions, or perhaps simply the idle, malevolent doodlings of an unseen, restless entity. The perceptions exhibit, with its themes of trauma and fractured reality, became the primary stage for this escalating personal torment. One of its central pieces was an interactive video installation titled The Ego's Prism. It utilized advanced biometric sensors to supposedly create abstract visual representations of the viewer's subconscious emotional state. When I had first tested it, it had produced swirling, calming patterns of blues and greens, reflecting my then professional focus and underlying anxiety. Now, when I reluctantly approached it during my solitary night shifts, its projections were monstrous, terrifying. Instead of abstract colors, it displayed distorted, nightmarish images that resonated with my deepest, most secret fears. Childhood anxieties I had never voiced, recent personal failures I had tried to bury, even fleeting, horrifying glimpses of what felt like my own future despair. The installation was not reflecting my subconscious. It was excavating it, vivisecting it, displaying its raw, bleeding contents for some unseen, malevolent audience. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps the sensors were malfunctioning, picking up stray electrical signals. Perhaps Miroir's programming was simply designed to provoke extreme reactions, its algorithms far more sophisticated and invasive than I had initially understood. But the images were too specific, too intimately tied to my own hidden vulnerabilities, to be mere coincidence or artistic intent. The art was reading me, and it was using what it found to terrify me. Then, the messages began. I would be working, late at my computer in the West Wing's small temporary curatorial office, the only sound the hum of the server racks and the ceaseless drumming of the rain, when text would begin to appear on my screen. typed out slowly, letter by agonizing, letter by unseen hands. We see your fragments, Sophia. Your fear is a vibrant hue. The asylum remembers its own. These were not emails, not system alerts. They appeared directly within my open documents, my curatorial notes, even once, chillingly, within the lines of a half-written message to Liam, my concerned friend. Each message was enigmatic, context-specific, echoing my anxieties, or sometimes quoting obscure, unsettling phrases from Miroir's own cryptic artist statements, or from the historical asylum records I had been secretly researching. The entity was not just watching. It was learning, processing, communicating. My attempts to document these digital incursions were met with a frustrating, intelligent evasiveness. Screenshots would yield only blank images. Log files would show no unauthorized access. The messages would vanish as silently as they had appeared, leaving no trace, only a residue of cold terror and the undeniable certainty that I was being actively, intelligently, tormented by a presence that could manipulate the very technology I relied upon. The gallery, once a place of ordered minimalist beauty, now felt like a hostile, sentient organism, its digital nervous system infected, its artistic installations, its eyes and ears, all focused on me. I felt a desperate, profound isolation. Mr. Thorne's glib dismissals replayed in my mind, making it clear that seeking help from him, from any official channel within the Veridian, would be futile, likely met with condescension or accusations against my own stability. One night, the kinetic sculpture by Miroir, the one with the obsidian shards that seemed to follow my movements, became the focus of a more direct, more terrifying interaction. As I passed it, a low, resonant hum began to emanate from its core, a sound that vibrated deep within my chest. The shards, which usually moved with a slow, almost graceful randomness, began to rotate with a new, sharp, almost aggressive precision, their polished black surfaces reflecting not just my image, but 1,000 distorted, leering faces that seemed to writhe within their depths. The humming intensified, and then a voice, cold and clear, yet undeniably a composite of the whispers I had heard before, spoke from the heart of the sculpture. You seek to understand what is not meant for your kind, little curator. It hissed, the sound seeming to come from all directions at once. The perceptions we offer are not for the sane. The asylum's children are restless. They hunger for new reflections. The sculpture's obsidian arms, the shards like sharpened talons, extended slowly, menacingly towards me, blocking my path. Their polished surfaces now reflecting only a single, vast, dark eye that seemed to hold all the sorrow and madness of the Blackwood Asylum within its unfathomable depths. This was no longer suggestion, no longer subtle manipulation. This was a direct, unambiguous threat, mediated through the cold, uncaring beauty of Miroir's art. I backed away, a scream trapped in my throat, my legs trembling. The sculpture returned to its slow, anodyne movements, the voice receding into the ambient hum of the gallery, leaving me once again in the oppressive, watchful silence. But the message had been delivered. I was not just an observer of the gallery's strangeness. I was a participant, a target, perhaps even a potential offering. The art was no longer imitating life or a nightmare. It was an active agent in it, a conduit for the tormented energies of the Blackwood Asylum, energies that Miroir had, either intentionally or inadvertently, tapped into and amplified. The Perceptions exhibit was a hunting ground, its installations the lures, its white cube spaces the killing floor, and I, its solitary night watch, was the chosen prey. My fascination with the exhibit, my professional duty to understand and present it, had become a terrifying personal ordeal. The gallery was no longer a place of work, but a place of profound, existential dread. Every shadow, every flicker of light, every hum of electricity was now a potential manifestation, a reminder of the intelligent, malevolent presence that had focused its chilling, unwavering attention solely on me. The rain continued to fall on Oakhaven, a mournful, indifferent witness to my growing terror. I knew, with a certainty that left no room for doubt, that I could not simply walk away from this. The entity, whatever it was, had marked me. It was in the art, in the walls, in the very air I breathed within the Veridian, and it was patiently, inexorably, drawing me deeper into its nightmare. The voice from Miroir's The Listener sculpture, the obsidian shards of the kinetic installation that had seemed to reach for me with predatory intent, these were no longer figments of a stressed imagination. They were direct, terrifying interactions, proof that the entity within the Veridian's west wing was intelligent, aware of me, and increasingly hostile. Sleep offered no escape, only a replay of distorted artworks and whispering shadows. My carefully curated professional life had become a waking nightmare, set against the constant, mournful drumming of rain on the gallery's vast roof. I knew I couldn't continue to face this alone. The weight of the secret, the escalating dread, was becoming unbearable. Despite his earlier subtle dismissiveness, I had to try and make Mr. Thorne understand, to convince him that something was profoundly, dangerously wrong with the perceptions. Exhibit, or rather, with the very ground upon which it stood. He was the director. Surely he had a responsibility to the safety of his staff, to the sanity of the gallery's future visitors. I spent a sleepless night rehearsing what I would say, trying to frame my experiences in a way that sounded rational, credible, not like the ravings of a sleep-deprived, over-imaginative assistant curator. I gathered my notes on the Blackwood Asylum, the unsettling details of Miroir's obsessive artistic methods, and even a shaky cell phone photograph I'd managed to snap of a particularly disturbing message that had typed itself onto my computer screen before vanishing. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. The next morning, I requested a meeting with Mr. Thorne. His office, a stark contrast to the unsettling ambiance of the West Wing, was a masterpiece of minimalist modern design, all clean lines, polished, chrome, and a single vast abstract painting that seemed to absorb all sound, creating an almost unnervingly quiet space. He greeted me with his usual suave charm, offering me a perfectly brewed espresso, his demeanor solicitous, concerned, as if I were a valued protege seeking guidance. "Sophia, my dear," he began, his voice smooth as polished steel. "You look tired." The final push before an opening is always demanding. Is there anything I can do to alleviate the pressure? The team is here to support you. His concern felt genuine, yet his eyes, a cool, intelligent gray, held that familiar, unreadable quality, a subtle watchfulness that always set me on edge. Taking a deep breath, I laid out my findings, my fears. I spoke of the asylum's tragic history, the unsettling resonances within Miroir's art, the whispers, the shadows, the personal attacks through the interactive installations, the messages on my computer. I showed him the photograph of the typed message. I tried to keep my voice calm, factual, presenting it as a series of deeply concerning anomalies that warranted serious investigation before the public was admitted. He listened patiently, his fingers steepled, his expression one of carefully modulated concern. When I had finished, a long silence filled the room, broken only by the distant, muted hiss of the city traffic and the ever-present sigh of the rain against his panoramic window. He nodded slowly, thoughtfully, then offered a small, sympathetic smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, a smile I was beginning to despise. "Sophia," he said, his voice gentle, almost paternal, "I appreciate your diligence, your profound engagement with the exhibit. Miroir's work is designed to be immersive, to challenge perceptions, to evoke strong emotional responses. That is its genius. And you, with your artistic sensitivity, your deep empathy, are perhaps more attuned to its power than most." His words were a silken dismissal, framing my terror as an overabundance of artistic temperament. "The history of the Blackwood Asylum," he continued, waving a dismissive hand, "is indeed a tragic footnote in Oakhaven's past, but its influence on the current site is purely atmospheric, shall we say. A source of local folklore, perhaps, that might add a certain frisson for those aware of it, but hardly a tangible threat, my dear." He chuckled softly, a sound that made my skin crawl. "As for these experiences you describe," he went on, his tone becoming slightly firmer, "the whispers, the shadows, the messages, I understand how the mind, under stress, working late in an empty gallery filled with such psychologically charged art, can play tricks. It's a testament to the power of Miroir's creations that they can evoke such vivid, if unsettling, impressions." He was, in the most charming, condescending way possible, telling me I was imagining it all. I tried to protest, to insist on the reality of what I had seen, what I had heard, but he cut me off, his smile fading slightly, his eyes hardening almost imperceptibly. "Sophia," he said, his voice now holding a new, steely edge beneath the velvet, "the Veridian is on the cusp of a major artistic triumph. The Perceptions exhibit is generating international buzz. We cannot afford to entertain unsubstantiated anxieties that might tarnish its debut or the gallery's reputation." There it was, the subtle discouragement, the veiled warning. He wasn't just dismissing my fears, he was actively suppressing any further inquiry. The gallery's image, its success, was paramount. The possibility of a genuine, malevolent presence, the echoes of a tormented past bleeding into the present, was an unwelcome narrative, one to be quashed, ignored, regardless of the potential danger. "Perhaps," he suggested, his charming smile returning, though it now felt predatory, "you need a short break, some time away from the exhibit before the opening. The pressure can be immense. We wouldn't want you to become overwhelmed." The way implication was clear. My continued employment, my professional credibility, depended on my silence, on my acceptance of his carefully constructed reality. A cold despair settled over me. He would not help. He would not listen. He was either willfully blind to the truth, or a far more chilling thought. He was somehow complicit, aware of the gallery's dark undercurrents and choosing to ignore them, or worse, to cultivate them for some unknown, perhaps nefarious purpose. His concern was not for me, but for the preservation of the gallery's pristine, untroubled facade. I left his office with a numb, hollow feeling, his polite, dismissive words echoing in my ears. The rain still fell, a gray, indifferent curtain over Oakhaven. The city, with its hidden histories and its watchful, ancient consciousness, felt vast and unknowable. And I was utterly alone within it, a tiny, insignificant witness to a horror that no one else would acknowledge. My attempts to find an ally, a rational explanation, had failed utterly. The Perceptions exhibit, with its labyrinthine white cubes and its psychologically invasive art, now felt like a meticulously designed trap. And Mr. Thorne, its charming, sophisticated director, was one of its impeccably dressed, smiling gatekeepers. He was not a protector, but a curator of a different kind of collection. A collection of silenced fears, of dismissed realities, of secrets buried deep beneath the gallery's polished floors. The knowledge was a cold, hard weight in my stomach. I could not rely on anyone within the Veridian. If I was to understand what was happening in the West Wing, if I was to survive its escalating personal attacks, I would have to do it alone. The asylum's tormented past was not just a historical footnote. It was an active, malevolent presence, and it had found a new, unwelcome focus in me. My resolve, though battered, hardened. Mr. Thorne's dismissal, his veiled threats, had not silenced me. They had merely confirmed the extent of the deception, the depth of the danger. The gallery held a terrible secret, and I, its newest assistant curator, was now a part of that secret, whether I wanted to be or not. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but the thought of surrender was unthinkable. Mr. Thorne's polished dismissal, his veiled insinuation that my experiences were a product of an overwrought artistic temperament, had left me feeling utterly isolated, yet perversely more determined. His refusal to acknowledge the palpable dread that saturated the West Wing, his subtle discouragement of any inquiry into the Blackwood Asylum's history, was not just condescension. It felt like a deliberate, calculated act of suppression. The rain outside mirrored my own bleak mood, a constant, weeping presence against the gallery's impassive glass facade. If the official channels were closed to me, if the gallery's director was intent on preserving a facade of normalcy at any cost, then I would have to seek answers in the Veridian's forgotten corners, in its unacknowledged past. My thoughts turned to the older, closed archives, a section of the sub-basement, rumored to house records deemed too sensitive, too mundane, or perhaps too unsettling for general access. It was a place few staff members ever ventured, a repository of the gallery's deeper, less curated history. Accessing it was a risk. The closed archives were officially off-limits without specific authorization from Thorne himself. Authorization I knew he would never grant for such a purpose. But Agnes, the elderly cleaner whose cryptic words about the West Wing's sorrows had resonated so deeply with me, unknowingly provided the opportunity. I saw her struggling with a heavy trolley of cleaning supplies near the archive's reinforced door, which she had propped open with a rubber wedge while she worked within its dusty confines. Seizing the moment, feigning a need to retrieve some obscure exhibition catalogs from a previous decade, I offered to help her. Agnes, her faded blue eyes holding a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. Surprise? Suspicion? Or just weariness? Accepted my offer with a grateful nod. While she was occupied in a distant aisle, I slipped away into the deeper, unlit sections of the archive, towards the shelves marked Personnel Records, Historical, and Building Maintenance Logs, West Wing Construction. The air here was thick with the scent of decaying paper, of dust undisturbed for decades, of secrets allowed to fester in the dark. My small flashlight beam cut a nervous swathe through the gloom, illuminating rows upon rows of bundled files, Forgotten ledgers and cardboard boxes overflowing with brittle, yellowed documents. It was a treasure trove for a historian, a nightmare for someone already teetering on the edge of an abyss of fear. I started with the old staff logbooks from the West Wing, particularly those kept by night security. The official entries were mundane. All secure, systems nominal. But in the margins of several, scribbled in faint pencil as if in haste or fear, were cryptic, unsettling notes. Heard voices again, Studio C. Cold spot by the new acquisition. Felt watched. Saw movement on camera 7, corridor D, playback clear. Am I losing my mind? These fragmented, fearful confessions, hidden beneath the veneer of official normalcy, sent a shiver of validation through me. I was not alone in my experiences. Others before me had heard the whispers, felt the chill, seen the shadows in this accursed wing. Their fears had been dismissed, ignored, perhaps even ridiculed, just as mine were by Mr. Thorne. The pattern of denial was as old as the haunting itself. Delving into the personnel files, I found a disturbing frequency of short tenures for staff, assigned to night duties in the West Wing. Resignation letters, when present at all, were terse, citing ill health, personal reasons, or an inability to cope with the unusual atmospheric conditions. Several files ended abruptly, with no resignation letter, only a stark internal memo noting the employee had failed to report for duty and was presumed to have abandoned their post. The most chilling discovery, however, lay buried deep within, a dusty box labeled Curatorial Correspondence Sensitive. It was a faded, carbon-copied internal memo, dated nearly 30 years prior, concerning one Mr. Alistair Finch, a promising young curator who had been tasked with overseeing an exhibit in the newly renovated West Wing, an exhibit described as exploring themes of confinement, memory, and the fragility of perception. The memo, penned by a previous director, detailed Mr. Finch's increasingly erratic behavior, his obsessive talk of disturbances in the wing, his claims that the artworks were communicating with him, that the building itself was alive. It concluded with a cold, clinical recommendation for an extended medical leave, noting that Mr. Finch had subsequently been quietly admitted to a private institution for long-term care due to a severe nervous breakdown. Alistair Finch. His story was a horrifying mirror of my own burgeoning fears. His fate, a stark, terrifying warning. He too had been sensitive to the gallery's undercurrents, had tried to understand, and had been dismissed as mad, his voice silenced, his career destroyed. The Perceptions exhibit, with its identical themes, now felt like a deliberate, cruel echo, a restaging of a past tragedy, with me cast in Finch's unfortunate role. As I read the memo, my hands trembling, Agnes appeared silently beside me, her presence making me jump. She looked at the document in my hand, then at my face, her own expression one of profound, weary sadness. "Some echoes are best left undisturbed, child," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant sigh of the gallery's ventilation. Mr. Finch, he saw too much. He listened too closely. The gallery, it doesn't like its depths to be plumbed by just anyone. Her words, no longer cryptic, but a direct, sorrowful confirmation, were a revelation. She knew. She had always known. Her earlier oblique warnings had been her own cautious way of trying to guide me away from this same path. What happened to him, Agnes? I asked, my voice choked. Is he still? She merely shook her head, her faded eyes filled with an ancient, unutterable grief. He became part of the silence, dear. like so many others who heard the whispers in the white cube. Then, her gaze fell upon something tucked deep within the folds of Alistair Finch's personnel file. Something I hadn't noticed. With a gnarled, gentle hand, she reached in and retrieved a small, flat object wrapped in decaying tissue paper. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing a tarnished silver locket, intricately engraved with what looked like intertwined willow branches. It was cold to the touch, yet it seemed to pulse with a faint, almost imperceptible energy. "He always wore this," Agnes murmured, placing the locket in my palm. "Said it belonged to his grandmother, that it protected him from bad dreams. It didn't protect him enough here, I suppose. Or perhaps," she added, her voice dropping even lower, "it simply chose to stay, a final memento." The locket felt heavy in my hand, a tangible link to a past curator's terror, to his lost sanity, to his absorption into the gallery's hungry silence. The weight of the locket, the memo detailing Finch's tragic fate, the unsettling entries in the security logs, it all coalesced into a horrifying, undeniable truth. The Veridian gallery, specifically its west wing, was a place of recurring cyclical horror, and Miroir's Perceptions exhibit was merely the latest catalyst, the newest instrument designed to amplify its ancient, malevolent energies. Mr. Thorne was not just dismissive, he was a gatekeeper, actively concealing a truth that had destroyed others before me. I clutched Alistair Finch's locket, its tarnished silver cold against my skin. It was a chilling relic, a warning, but also perhaps a clue. He had tried to understand, he had listened, and he had been consumed. I was now treading the same perilous path, armed with the same dawning, terrifying knowledge. The echoes of Curator's past were no longer just whispers. They were screaming warnings in my mind. My own fate, I realized with a fresh surge of cold dread, was now inextricably linked to theirs. I was not the first to feel the gallery's icy breath, to hear its sorrowful secrets, to be targeted by its unseen, watchful intelligence. And unless I found a way to break this cycle, to understand and confront the true nature of the entity that resided within these walls, I would undoubtedly share their silent, forgotten end. The rain outside seemed to fall harder, a lament for all the lost souls of the Veridian. Alistair Finch's tarnished silver locket felt like a cold, heavy stone in my hand, a tangible link to a past curator's descent into madness and oblivion within the Veridian's predatory embrace. Agnes's sorrowful confirmation of his fate, her hushed warnings about the gallery's deeper layers, had stripped away any lingering hope that Mr. Thorne was merely misguided. He was a gatekeeper, and I, like Finch before me, was a subject of the gallery's chilling, unwavering attention. The rain outside seemed to whisper Finch's name, a mournful, cautionary sigh. Leaving the gallery that night was different. The usual sense of relief at escaping its unsettling atmosphere was absent, replaced by a gnawing certainty that its influence was no longer confined within its stark white walls. As I walked through the rain-swept, deserted streets of Oakhaven, every shadow seemed to lengthen unnaturally. Every gust of wind through the darkened alleyways carried faint, sibilant whispers that echoed those I'd heard within Miroir's installations. The city itself felt complicit, an extension of the gallery's watchful gaze. The familiar route to my apartment, usually a mundane 20-minute walk, transformed into a gauntlet of perceived threats. The reflections in shop windows seemed to hold fleeting, distorted figures just behind me. The rhythmic hum of transformers and sidewalk grates now carried that same unsettling, low-frequency thrum I associated with the Perceptions wing. I felt exposed, hunted. as if the entity, tethered to the gallery, could now project its awareness, its tendrils of influence, throughout the city's sleeping, rain-soaked veins. It was when I reached my own apartment building, its familiar brick, facade usually a symbol of sanctuary, that the true extent of the spreading stain became terrifyingly clear. The small, enclosed lobby, typically smelling of floor polish and stale air, now held a faint, unmistakable trace of that cloying, Swedish scent from Miroir's echo chamber installation, a scent I associated with the deepest, most unsettling layers of the exhibit. My blood ran cold. It had followed me home. Inside my apartment, the familiar comforts offered no refuge. The shadows cast by my own furniture seemed to stretch and contort in the dim light, filtering through my rain-streaked windows, mimicking the disturbing angular shapes of Miroir's kinetic sculptures. A profound chill had settled in the air, a damp, unnatural coldness that no amount of heating could dispel. The very atmosphere of my home had been subtly, yet undeniably corrupted, tainted by the gallery's encroaching dread. Then, the whispers began here too. Not just the faint, indistinct murmurs I had grown accustomed to, but clearer, more articulate sounds, seeming to emanate from my own electronic devices. My television, switched off, would emit a soft burst of static, and within it, a sibilant hiss that sounded chillingly like my name. My laptop, closed and unplugged, would sometimes hum with that same low, resonant frequency I had traced within the gallery's oldest equipment. The interactive nature of the haunting, once confined to Miroir's technologically advanced artworks, now seemed to be imbuing my own mundane possessions with a malevolent sentience. It was as if the entity, having identified me as a focal point, was now using any available conduit to maintain its connection, to assert its presence in every corner of my life. The city's darkness, its hidden frequencies, were actively reaching into my home, violating my last bastion of perceived safety. Sleep became a distant, almost forgotten luxury. My nights filled with a heightened, terrified awareness of every creak, every sigh, every inexplicable electronic murmur within my apartment. The nightmares, when exhaustion finally claimed me, were vivid, terrifying journeys through labyrinthine, decaying art installations, pursued by shadowy figures with Miroir's distorted obsidian eyes, their whispers a constant, tormenting chorus. I would awaken gasping, drenched in a cold sweat, the line between dream and reality dangerously blurred. Desperate, isolated, and on the verge of a complete breakdown, I called Liam. My voice was a ragged, frantic plea, as I tried once more to make him understand the true nature of the horror I was experiencing, the way it had followed me from the gallery, an insidious, spreading stain on my life. I told him about Finch's locket, about Agnes's warnings, about the whispers in my own apartment, the shadows that mimicked the art. He arrived within the hour, his face etched with a deep, profound concern that, for a moment, offered a sliver of hope. He listened patiently, his gaze fixed on my pale, trembling form as I recounted the escalating terror, the feeling of being relentlessly pursued by an unseen, intelligent entity. He held my hand, his touch warm, reassuring, a small anchor in the maelstrom of my fear. But as I spoke, I saw the familiar skepticism begin to cloud his eyes. "Alara," he said gently, when I had finally exhausted myself, his voice filled with a weary pity that was almost worse than outright disbelief. "I know you're terrified. I can see that. But this sounds like you're having a breakdown. The stress of the new job, That disturbing exhibit, the late hours, the isolation, it's all taking its toll. There are people who can help, professionals. His words, however kindly meant, were a devastating blow. He still didn't believe me, not really. He saw a woman unraveling, not a woman under supernatural assault. As he spoke, trying to soothe me with rational explanations, with offers of help that felt utterly inadequate, a gust of wind, impossibly strong for a closed apartment, slammed the bedroom door shut with a violent crack that made us both jump. The air in the room instantly dropped several degrees. Liam stared at the closed door, his face suddenly ashen, his pragmatic explanations dying on his lips. For a moment, a flicker of true, unadulterated fear, the same fear I lived with daily, passed across his eyes. He had felt the chill, heard the impossible slam. But then, with a visible effort, he seemed to rally, to reconstruct his rational defenses. "Old buildings, Ilara," he stammered, his voice lacking its earlier conviction. "Drafts, faulty latches. There's always a logical reason." He didn't believe. Or perhaps he couldn't allow himself to believe. The implications were too terrifying, too far beyond the scope of his ordered, rational world. He made his excuses soon after, promising to call, to check in, but his eyes held a new, frightened distance. He was scared, not just for me, but perhaps by a fleeting, unwelcome glimpse into the abyss I inhabited. His departure left me in a deeper, more profound isolation than ever before. The city's shadow had not just touched my home, it had driven away my last potential ally, leaving me utterly alone to face its encroaching darkness. The entity, whatever it was, had successfully severed my connection to the outside world, to rational support, to any hope of external validation. I was its prisoner, not just within the gallery, but within my own fracturing mind, my own haunted apartment. The locket of Alistair Finch felt heavy in my hand, cold, silver weight of shared, inevitable doom. He too had been dismissed as mad, his terror rationalized away, until the gallery, the entity, had finally claimed him. Was I destined to follow his tragic path, to become another forgotten echo, another curator of nightmares, whose story would be whispered in hushed tones by future gallery staff, only to be dismissed as mere folklore? The rain continued to fall, a ceaseless, weeping lament for all the lost souls of Oakhaven, for all those who had been touched by its ancient urban darkness. The fight for my sanity, for my very self, was no longer confined to the West Wing's sterile white cubes. It was here, in my home, in my mind. And I knew with a chilling certainty that the entity was just beginning to reveal the true extent of its power, its patience, its insatiable, terrifying hunger. Liam's frightened departure, his inability to fully accept the reality of what had transpired in my apartment, had solidified my terrible isolation. The gallery's shadow had not only touched my home, it had severed my last reliable connection to the rational world. Alistair Finch's locket, cold and heavy in my pocket, was a constant reminder of the fate that awaited those who saw too much within the Veridian's walls. The ceaseless rain outside felt like the city itself weeping, or perhaps watching with a million indifferent, watery eyes. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that I could not simply wait for the entity to escalate its torment. Mr. Thorne, with his polished dismissals and veiled threats, was a key figure in this unfolding nightmare, either a willing accomplice or a dangerously ignorant gatekeeper. I had to confront him again, armed not just with my fears, but with the grim evidence I had unearthed from the gallery's forgotten archives. The story of Alistair Finch, the pattern of disappearances. The next morning, I found him in his stark, minimalist office, reviewing plans for the upcoming Perceptions Vernissage. He greeted me with that same infuriatingly suave charm, though I thought I detected a new wariness in his cool gray eyes. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I laid out Finch's personnel file, the damning memo, and even the tarnished silver locket, its presence on his gleaming chrome desk a small potent accusation. Mr. Finch experienced something very similar to what I am going through, Mr. Thorne, I stated, my voice low but firm. He was dismissed as unstable, institutionalized. But what if he wasn't mad? What if this wing, this exhibit, is genuinely dangerous? Thorne listened, his expression carefully neutral, but I saw a muscle twitch in his jaw. He was not as unperturbed as he wished to appear. He sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. Sophia, my dear, Alistair Finch was a tragic case. Yes, a brilliant mind, but prone to artistic excesses, shall we say. He became overly identified with the more challenging themes of his work. It's a known occupational hazard in our field. You are young, passionate. I merely caution you against treading a similar path of excessive immersion. His condescension was a tangible thing. This isn't about immersion, Mr. Thorne, I pressed, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. This is about what this gallery is built upon, about what Mirwar's art is awakening. It's a conduit. I believe this wing, this exhibit, is acting as some kind of portal. The word hung in the air between us, stark and unbelievable. Yet to me, it felt like the only possible explanation for the escalating, intelligent malevolence I was experiencing. Lorne's smile became a thin, brittle line. A portal? He echoed, a hint of genuine surprise, or perhaps carefully feigned incredulity, in his voice. My dear Sophia, you have an extraordinary imagination. That is what makes you a promising curator. But art, however provocative, however challenging, does not channel unseen energies in any literal sense. It channels human emotion, human perception. That is its power and its purpose. But what if, I persisted, desperation creeping in, those human emotions, the ones left behind by the asylum's tormented souls, are the very energies it's channeling? What if Mirwar's art is giving them form, a voice? He steepled his fingers, his gaze unreadable. A fascinating theory, Sophia. One that would make an excellent, if somewhat lurid, critical essay, but hardly a basis for operational gallery decisions. The vernissage proceeds as planned. His finality was a slammed door. He would not, could not, acknowledge the possibility. But as I turned to leave, defeated, he added, almost as an afterthought, his voice a low murmur, art has always been a conversation with the unseen, hasn't it? A dialogue with the ghosts of our collective psyche. The Veridian, built as it is, in the heart of old Oakhaven, is undoubtedly a place of powerful convergences. One must simply learn to navigate them. His words, though evasive, felt like a tiny, chilling admission. Powerful convergences. The phrase echoed in my mind as I left his office, the locket heavy in my pocket. Thorne knew more than he was letting on. He acknowledged a power, even if he cloaked it in art theory and psychological metaphor. My portal theory, however outlandish, had struck a nerve. But he would not help me. I was on my own, armed only with a terrifying, half-formed understanding. My thoughts turned again to Mr. Silas Blackwood, the reclusive urban folklorist. He had spoken of the urbis anima, of places where the veil was thin. He had understood. He was my only hope for more insight, for some way to navigate these powerful convergences before they consumed me entirely. Finding him again, however, was another challenge. His apartment, when I returned to that forgotten gaslit street, was dark, its windows shuttered. After several fruitless visits, leaving increasingly desperate notes, he finally responded. A cryptic message, slipped under my own apartment door late one rainy night, instructed me to meet him at a specific, ancient stone cross in the city's oldest, most dilapidated cemetery. A place I knew from my own explorations was steeped in unsettling local legends. The meeting was set for the following evening, at the hour of deepest twilight. The cemetery was a chilling landscape of leaning, moss-covered tombstones and ancient, gnarled yew trees, their branches like skeletal, arms reaching out in the gathering gloom. The rain had softened to a fine, persistent mist, shrouding everything in an ethereal, ghostly silence. Silas Blackwood was waiting for me by the stone cross, a hunched, indistinct figure in the fading light, looking more like one of the cemetery's own spectral inhabitants than a living man. I presented him with my portal theory, with Thorne's veiled admissions, with the full, terrifying extent of my experiences, the personal attacks, the technological manipulations, the feeling of an intelligent entity learning, adapting, focusing on me. He listened in silence, his bird-like eyes glinting in the twilight. The only sound the soft drip of moisture from the ancient yew branches and the distant, mournful cry of a city siren. When I had finished, he nodded slowly. The urbis anima, the soul of the city, he murmured, is indeed a collector, a resonator, and places of intense, concentrated human experience. Asylums, old theaters, yes, even galleries showcasing art that probes the raw nerves of the psyche, can become its nexuses, its feeding grounds, if you will. The art itself, if it resonates with the site's existing energies, can act as a key, an amplifier, a doorway. His confirmation was a cold fist in my gut. So, the perceptions exhibit, I whispered. It is a portal? Silas sighed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. More accurately, child, it has provided the perfect lock for a door that was already there. A door that has been creaking open for a very long time, perhaps since the asylum's first stone was laid. Miroir's art, with its focus on trauma and fractured perception, has simply given the entities that linger there a familiar language, a means of clearer expression. These entities, he continued, his voice barely a breath in the misty air, they feed on strong emotion, on focused attention, on the very act of perception. The more an artwork or an individual resonates with their particular frequency of sorrow or fear, the stronger their connection becomes. You, with your sensitivity, your deep engagement with these themes, have become a particularly potent focal point. The Vernissage, I said, my voice tight with dread. The opening night, with all those people, all those emotions. Silas's eyes, even in the dim light, seemed to hold a profound ancient sorrow. It will be a feast, child, he whispered, a symphony of new perceptions for the urbis anima to taste, to absorb. The energies released will be considerable. The portal, if it is indeed as open as you fear, could become a torrent. His words painted a horrifying picture of the upcoming event. It wouldn't just be an art opening. It would be a psychic banquet. And the guests, the critics, the art patrons would be the unwitting offerings. And I, who understood, who had seen behind the veil, would be powerless to stop it, or perhaps even a part of it. The rain began to fall more heavily again, a cold, steady weeping from the darkening sky. I left Silas Blackwood in the misty, silent graveyard, his final, dire warning about the Vernissage a chilling echo in my mind. The portal theory was no longer a theory. It was a terrifying, impending reality. The Perceptions exhibit was a loaded gun, and the opening night was the pulling of the trigger. I had to find a way to act, to intervene, before Oakhaven's art world became a stage, for a horror beyond their wildest, most avant-garde imaginings. The day before the Perceptions Vernissage dawned heavy and gray, the Oakhaven sky a bruised, swollen belly threatening a deluge. Mr. Silas Blackwood's chilling words about the opening night being a feast for the urbis anima, a symphony of new perceptions for it to consume, had become a constant, terrifying litany in my mind. Each passing hour felt like a grain of sand slipping through an hourglass, counting down to an unimaginable catastrophe. The gallery, meanwhile, buzzed with the mundane, oblivious energy of final preparations. Florists arranged stark, architectural blooms in the minimalist lobby. Caterers bustled, planning their sophisticated canapes. Lighting technicians made their final, minute adjustments, unaware that the shadows they were sculpting were already alive, animated by forces far older and more sinister than any artistic intent. I moved through it all like a ghost, my smile a brittle facade, my heart a cold stone of dread, the locket of Alistair Finch, a constant, chilling weight in my pocket. The West Wing, home to Miroir's unsettling masterpieces, felt particularly charged. The air within its white cube spaces thrumming with a palpable, almost febrile anticipation. The usual faint electrical hum I associated with the entity was now a louder, more insistent vibration, a predatory purr that seemed to emanate from the very foundations, from the unhallowed ground of the Blackwood Asylum beneath. The rain, which had been a steady drizzle, began to fall with a new, restless intensity. Miroir's installations, once subtly responsive to my presence, now seemed to possess a brazen, overt sentience. The kinetic sculpture with its obsidian shards no longer just shifted its angles. It writhed, its polished black arms reaching and retracting with a slow, deliberate menace, its movements a silent, threatening dance. I saw it, more than once, turn its multifaceted gaze directly towards me as I passed, its reflections holding not just my fragmented image, but a deeper, colder, more ancient scrutiny. The interactive video piece, the ego's prism, which had once tormented me with projections of my own hidden fears, now seemed to have tired of that game. Instead, its screens flickered with chaotic, almost violent bursts of color and distorted sound, interspersed with fleeting subliminal images that I couldn't quite decipher, but which left me with a profound sense of unease, glimpses of archaic medical instruments, of shadowed corridors, of faces contorted in silent screams, and the whispers. They were no longer faint, sibilant murmurs confined to specific artworks or the static on dead channels. They were everywhere in the West Wing now, a constant, rustling, multi-voiced chorus that seemed to swirl in the air around me, to emanate from the stark white walls, from the polished concrete floor. They were still largely unintelligible, a cacophony of sorrow, anger, and a chilling, almost gleeful anticipation. Sometimes, however, a single phrase would detach itself from the chorus, spoken with a terrifying clarity, a voice that seemed to know me intimately. "Soon, Sophia," one such whisper breathed directly into my ear as I stood alone in the echoing hall. "Soon you will perceive everything. Soon you will join the collection." The voice was cold, ancient, and utterly devoid of pity. My blood ran to ice. The few remaining gallery staff, still working late into the evening, focused on their own mundane tasks, seemed oblivious to the escalating strangeness, to the oppressive, charged atmosphere that was making it difficult for me to breathe. Or perhaps, like Mr. Thorne, they had simply chosen a path of willful ignorance, a necessary blindness to survive within the Veridian's increasingly malevolent embrace. Their cheerful, oblivious chatter felt like a grotesque counterpoint to my silent internal terror. I found myself drawn again and again to Alistair Finch's locket. Its tarnished silver felt strangely warm now, almost vibrating faintly in my hand. It was as if his own trapped spirit, his own unheeded warnings, were trying to communicate with me, to offer some last, desperate piece of guidance before the impending storm, both literal and psychic, broke in its full fury. But what it was trying to tell me, I could not yet decipher. Mr. Thorne, when I encountered him briefly during a final walkthrough, was a whirlwind of charismatic energy, his excitement about the Vernissage almost manic. He spoke of record attendance, of international press, of the perceptions exhibit cementing the Veridian's place on the global art stage. He seemed utterly oblivious, or perhaps deliberately indifferent, to the almost palpable aura of dread that now saturated the West. "Wing, a triumph, Sophia, a veritable triumph," he exclaimed, his eyes glittering with an almost feverish light. "Miroir has surpassed themselves. This exhibit will not just be seen, it will be felt, deep in the very marrow of all who attend. It will change their perceptions indeed." His words, given what I now knew or suspected about the exhibit's true nature, were a horrifying, unintentional prophecy. His enthusiasm, his blindness, only solidified my own terrible certainty. The influx of hundreds of new minds, new emotions, new perceptions, into this psychically charged space, this awakened conduit, would be catastrophic. Silas Blackwood's warning about a feast was no mere metaphor. The urbis anima, the coalesced sorrow of the Blackwood Asylum, amplified by Miroir's art, would gorge itself, its power swelling to an uncontrollable, perhaps permanent, level. As night deepened, the external storm began to gather its true force. The wind rose to a ferocious howl, rattling the gallery's massive windows, and the rain became a torrential, horizontal assault. Distant thunder rumbled, drawing closer with each passing hour, each crack a precursor to the chaos I knew was about to be unleashed within these walls. The city outside was hunkering down, preparing for the tempest. Inside the Veridian, a different, more insidious storm was reaching its crescendo. I stood alone in the heart of the perceptions exhibit, the only illumination the eerie, shifting lights of Miroir's installations, and the stark, intermittent flashes of lightning from the raging storm outside. The whispers were a deafening chorus now, swirling around me, calling my name, promising oblivion, promising union, promising terror. The air was thick, heavy, crackling with an unseen, malevolent energy. Then, in a moment of horrifying clarity, a vision overwhelmed me. I saw the Vernissage, the crowds of unsuspecting art patrons, their minds open, vulnerable, as they engaged with Miroir's challenging pieces. and I saw the entity, the coalesced sorrow of the asylum, reaching out from the art, from the walls, from the very floor, its shadowy tendrils enveloping them, feeding on their emotions, their perceptions, their sanity, drawing them into its ancient, hungry void. It was a premonition of a mass psychic assault, a vision of the gallery transformed into a charnel house of minds. The perceptions exhibit would indeed be an experience they wouldn't soon forget, for it would likely be the last coherent experience many of them would ever have. The weight of this terrible foreknowledge, the responsibility to act, to somehow prevent this impending catastrophe, was almost unbearable. Mr. Thorne was a lost cause, either a fool or a willing accomplice. The gallery staff were oblivious. Liam, my friend, thought I was losing my mind. Mr. Silas Blackwood had offered cryptic warnings but no clear solutions. I was alone, armed only with a tarnished silver locket, a booklet of fading warding symbols, and the terrifying certainty of what was about to unfold. The largest kinetic sculpture in the center of the hall, Miroir's obsidian masterpiece, began to move with a new, violent energy, its shards thrashing like the limbs of some dying, monstrous insect, its polished surfaces reflecting 1,000 screaming, distorted faces. The whispers reached a fever pitch, coalescing into a single, powerful, commanding voice that boomed through the hall, through my very bones. It begins. The feast is prepared, and you, little curator, will be the first course. My time was up. The eve of the Vernissage had become the eve of destruction. Quickening, I had sensed, was the sharpening of an ancient, insatiable appetite. The storm outside was a mere reflection of the true tempest about to be unleashed within these walls, and I was standing directly in its path, with nowhere left to run, and only the slimmest, most desperate hope of finding a way to fight back against the encroaching, all-consuming nightmare. The feast is prepared, and you, little curator, will be the first course. The entity's thundering, possessive voice, a chorus of ancient hunger and chilling amusement, reverberated through the west wing, through my very bones. Miroir's obsidian sculpture thrashed before me, its shards like 1,000 glittering, predatory teeth. Outside, the storm had reached its apocalyptic zenith, the wind a screaming vortex, the rain a solid, impenetrable wall against the gallery's vast, unblinking eye of glass. My terror was absolute. Yet within it, a cold, desperate resolve began to ignite. The first few unfortunate guests for the exclusive press preview were already beginning to arrive, their sleek black cars navigating the flooded Oakhaven streets with difficulty. I saw them from a high window in a connecting corridor, oblivious figures huddling under umbrellas, making their way towards the Veridian's grand entrance, unaware they were stepping not into a sanctuary of art, but into a meticulously prepared abattoir of the psyche. Their impending arrival added a new, sickening urgency to my dread. Mr. Thorne, ever the consummate host, greeted them in the main lobby, his charismatic smile firmly in place, his voice a smooth balm against the storm's fury. He offered champagne, spoke of Miroir's genius, of the transformative power of perceptions. Watching him on a distant security monitor, I felt a wave of nausea. He was leading lambs to the slaughter, his urbane charm a horrifyingly effective lure, and the feast, I knew, was not just for the entity, but perhaps for his own insatiable ambition. Then, with a sound like the sky itself ripping apart, a colossal spear of lightning struck the Veridian's towering central atrium, or perhaps a nearby substation. The entire gallery was plunged into an instantaneous, suffocating blackness. The emergency lights, designed to provide a reassuring glow, flickered erratically for a few agonizing seconds, then died with a pathetic sigh, leaving only the wild, intermittent strobing of the lightning outside to illuminate the ensuing chaos. Collective gasp, then rising panic, echoed from the lobby. The entity, I sensed with a sickening certainty, had been waiting for this, for the cover of darkness, for the heightened fear, for the moment when the gallery's sophisticated technological defenses were crippled. The faint, almost imperceptible hum that had underscored its presence now swelled into a deafening, disorienting roar. A sound that seemed to emanate from the walls, the floor, the very air itself. In the brief, stark flashes of lightning, the perceptions exhibit transformed into a true nightmare gallery. Mirwar's kinetic sculptures no longer just shifted, they lunged, they writhed, their movements sharp, aggressive, their shadows monstrous, animated. The interactive video screens, now powered by some unseen, internal source, blazed with terrifying accusatory images, contorted faces from the Blackwood Asylum, symbols that seemed to burn into the retina, and fleeting, horrifying glimpses of what looked like my own future self, trapped and screaming. Corridors that had been straight and familiar now seemed to twist and lengthen into impossible, Escher-like perspectives. Doorways vanished, replaced by solid, unyielding walls, while new, darkened openings appeared where none had been before, beckoning into unseen, unknown depths. The gallery was actively, intelligently, rearranging itself, becoming a fluid, predatory labyrinth designed to confuse, to isolate, to trap. The scent of ozone from the lightning strike mingled with the cloying sweetness of decay and something else, something ancient and deeply unsettling. The whispers were no longer confined to the West Wing. They were everywhere, a deafening, multi-layered chorus of voices, some pleading, some taunting, some screaming in an agony that felt centuries old. They clawed at my mind, trying to find purchase, to unravel my sanity with their insidious, personalized torments. "Lost, Sophia?" they hissed. "Nowhere to run, little curator. The gallery always claims its own. You are part of the collection now." I fought against the disorienting illusions, against the crushing weight of the entity's psychic assault, my thoughts racing. The guests, Mr. Thorne, where were they? Were they experiencing this same personalized hell? Or was the entity's primary focus now entirely on me, the one who had seen too much, who had dared to try and understand its nature? The locket of Alistair Finch felt like a burning coal in my pocket, its presence a stark reminder of past failures, of souls consumed. Then, through a momentarily clear flash of lightning, I saw him, Mr. Thorne. He was not in the lobby with his panicked guests, but standing alone at the far end of a long, distorted corridor, bathed in the eerie, pulsing glow of a single, still active emergency light. He was not terrified. He was watching me, his usual charming smile replaced by an expression of cold, calculating interest, his eyes reflecting the gallery's unnatural light with an almost inhuman gleam. In that instant, I knew. He was no mere ignorant gatekeeper, no oblivious puppet. He was a willing accomplice, a high priest of this urban horror, perhaps even a beneficiary of its ancient, terrible power. His ambition, his desire for the Veridian to be a gallery of unforgettable experiences, had a far more sinister, literal meaning. He was a part of the trap, a vital component in the mechanism that fed the entity. His gaze met mine across the storm-racked, shifting space, and he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of chilling, proprietary acknowledgement. he knew what was happening to me, knew what awaited me, and he approved. The betrayal, the sheer cold-blooded monstrosity of it, was a fresh wave of horror, more personal, more devastating than even the entity's direct assault. I was truly, utterly alone. As if sensing my realization, my despair, the entity intensified its focus. The very floor beneath my feet seemed to ripple, to become insubstantial, and the walls themselves seemed to breathe, to close in. A shadowy tendril, blacker than the surrounding darkness, lashed out from a nearby sculpture, narrowly missing my face, its touch icy cold, reeking of the grave and forgotten sorrows. I stumbled back, a cry torn from my lips. I was being herded, driven towards the heart of the West Wing, towards Miroir's most challenging, most psychologically invasive installations. The gallery was no longer just a space. It was an active, intelligent predator, and I was its cornered prey. The whispers urged me onward, promising an end to fear, a union with the Great Perception, a place among the gallery's eternal, silent collection. I remembered Silas Blackwood's warning about distinguishing fear from dream, and then choosing neither. But how could I choose when reality itself was a nightmare, when the very fabric of the world was unraveling around me? The locket, the button I'd found near Sparrowwood Lane. No, that was another place, another haunting. My mind was fracturing under the strain. Alistair Finch's locket. Yes, that was it. It offered no comfort, only a reminder of a shared terrible fate. The kinetic sculpture of obsidian shards, Miroir's centerpiece, loomed before me, its black surfaces seeming to drink the faint emergency light, its form now unmistakably, terrifyingly, sentient. It shifted. It rotated. Its many facets reflecting 1,000 distorted, screaming images of myself, each one a prisoner in a shard of black glass. And from its core, the voice, the entity's collective consciousness, spoke with a chilling, possessive calm. "Welcome home, Sophia," it whispered, the sound a silken caress, a lover's murmur, yet filled with an ancient, insatiable hunger. "Your perceptions are now ours, your fear, our delight, your story, another beautiful, tragic echo in our eternal gallery." The obsidian arms of the sculpture reached out, slowly, inexorably, to embrace me, to draw me into its cold, lightless, fragmented heart. My own screams were swallowed by the storm in the gallery's oppressive, triumphant silence. The obsidian shards of Miroir's sculpture, now unmistakably alive with the entity's chilling sentience, moved to envelop me, their polished black surfaces reflecting 1,000 fractured images of my own terror. The voice, a triumphant chorus of ancient hunger, filled my mind. "Welcome home, Sophia." This was it, the point of no return, the moment of consumption. Yet, amidst the paralyzing fear, a tiny, defiant ember of my former self, the meticulous curator, the seeker of truth, flickered to life. If I was to be part of the collection, I would not go silently. I remembered Mr. Silas Blackwood's words about art channeling unseen energies, about the gallery being a place of powerful convergences, and Mr. Thorne's inadvertent admission, his cynical pronouncements about the exhibit being an unforgettable experience. This entire West Wing, built on the tormented foundations of Blackwood Asylum, amplified by Miroir's psychologically invasive art, was a sophisticated machine designed to harvest perception, to feed on emotion. But every machine, I reasoned with a desperate lucidity, had a mechanism, perhaps even a flaw. My eyes darted around the storm-racked, darkened hall, searching for something, anything. Alistair Finch's locket, which I still clutched, felt cold, a dead weight. But then my gaze fell upon the ego's prism, the interactive video installation that had mirrored my deepest fears. If it could reflect my terror, could it also reflect my will? Could it be made a weapon instead of a tool of torment? It was a wild, desperate gamble, born of sheer terror and a curator's intimate knowledge of the exhibit's mechanics. With a strangled cry that was half defiance, half prayer, I lunged away from the encroaching obsidian sculpture, towards the ego's prism. The entity shrieked in my mind, a sound of surprised, furious outrage. Shadowy tendrils lashed out from the darkness, trying to ensnare me, but I dodged them, my movements fueled by a primal surge of adrenaline. The few terrified VIP guests who had been caught in the blackout were huddled in a far corner, their whimpers a distant, irrelevant sound. I reached the installation, its biometric sensors already flaring, responding to my heightened emotional state. Instead of succumbing to the fear it tried to reflect, I focused all my will, all my desperate courage, on a single powerful image. Not of my personal anxieties, but of the asylum's true history, of the suffering I had researched, of the innocent, lives consumed. I projected onto it the raw, untainted grief of Alistair Finch, the sorrow held within his locket. I offered it not my perception, but theirs. The screens of the ego's prism, which had been designed to create abstract, personalized art from individual emotion, flickered violently. Instead of my fears, they began to display stark, archival images of the Blackwood Asylum itself, of its barred windows, its empty corridors, its forgotten sorrowful faces. The entity, which had been using the art to channel its narrative, was now confronted with the raw, unvarnished truth of its own origins, a truth it had perhaps sought to obscure, to absorb, to forget. A sound of immense, almost physical pain tore through the gallery, a sound that was not just in my mind, but vibrated through the very floorboards. The shadowy manifestations recoiled, their forms flickering, their confident malevolence replaced by a dawning confusion, a horrified recognition. The whispers, which had been a tormenting chorus, now became a cacophony of genuine, unadulterated anguish, the voices of the asylum's true trapped souls, finally given unmediated expression. The obsidian sculpture froze, its menacing arms retracting, its polished surfaces now reflecting not my terror, but the swirling, agonized faces from the asylum's past. Mr. Thorne, who had been watching from the shadows with a look of cold, almost gleeful anticipation, now stared in abject horror, his carefully constructed composure shattering. "No!" he screamed. "This is not how it perceives! This is not the art!" He looked utterly undone, a terrified puppet whose strings had just been violently, unexpectedly severed. The gallery itself seemed to be in revolt. The lights, which had been out, now flickered erratically, not with the entity's control, but with the surge of raw, uncurated psychic energy. The very foundations of the West Wing groaned, and a deep, resonant hum, like a breaking wave, pulsed from beneath the floor, from the unhallowed ground of the asylum. The portal, if that's what it was being overloaded, its delicate balance disrupted by the raw, unfiltered truth of its own tragic history. I knew I had to find the true focal point, the heart of this convergence that Silas had spoken, of the place where the gallery's modern structure met the asylum's ancient wound. It was not in Miroir's art, but beneath it. remembering the architectural plans, the location of the oldest, deepest foundations. I ran towards the center of the west wing, towards the spot where the obsidian sculpture now stood, frozen and silent. There, on the polished concrete floor, a network of faint, almost invisible cracks, unnoticed before, now pulsed with a dim, sickly yellow light. The same light I had seen in the deepest, most disturbing layers of the ego's prism, when it had shown me my fears. This was it. This was the nexus, the point where the asylum's sorrow bled into the gallery, where the entity drew its power, where Miroir had, intentionally or not, placed their most potent antenna. Holding Alistair Finch's locket aloft, its silver now, strangely warm, almost burning, I pressed it against the glowing cracks in the floor. I poured into it not just my fear, but my empathy, my acknowledgement of the suffering this place had witnessed, my desperate plea for release, for an end to this cycle of torment. I offered not a new perception for the entity to consume, but a simple, human desire for peace, for the tormented souls of Blackwood Asylum to finally rest. A blinding white light erupted from the locket, from the cracks in the floor, engulfing the entire west wing. The entity shrieked, a sound of unimaginable agony, and then, astonishingly, of something akin to release. The shadowy forms that had plagued the gallery dissolved, not into nothingness, but into faint, shimmering motes of light that drifted upwards, like ashes on a gentle breeze, towards the storm-battered roof, and then were gone. The violent shaking of the gallery ceased. The oppressive, malevolent atmosphere lifted, replaced by a profound, almost holy quiet. The emergency lights flickered back on, steady now, casting a calm, unwavering glow. The storm outside, as if its purpose had been fulfilled, began to subside, the wind's howl softening to a mournful sigh, the rain easing to a gentle, cleansing patter. I found myself kneeling on the floor, exhausted, trembling. Alistair Finch's locket now cool and still in my hand. Mr. Thorne was a huddled, broken figure in the corner, muttering incoherently, his urbane mask shattered forever. The few VIP guests, dazed and terrified, were slowly beginning to pick themselves up, looking around in bewildered disbelief at the now strangely peaceful, if somewhat disheveled, gallery. The Perceptions exhibit, Miroir's masterpiece of psychological torment, was silent. Its installations were still, their screens dark, their whispers stilled. The art, which had been a conduit for so much horror, now felt inert. Just objects. The power that had animated them, the ancient sorrow of Blackwood Asylum, had been acknowledged, confronted, and perhaps, finally, allowed to find some measure of peace, its echoes no longer trapped, but released. Dawn was breaking over Oakhaven, its pale, watery light filtering through the gallery's rain-streaked windows. The city outside looked clean, newborn, as if the storm had washed away more than just the night's grime. The Veridian gallery was still standing, but it felt different, lighter, its foundations no longer a source of fear, but of a profound, sorrowful history that had finally been heard. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that my life as a curator, as a perceiver of art, had been irrevocably changed. I had walked through a nightmare gallery and emerged not unscathed, but with a new, terrifying, and ultimately strangely hopeful understanding of the power of perception, the weight of history, and the enduring echoes of the human heart. and the At city held its secrets, but sometimes a single focused light could illuminate even its darkest corners. The Veridian breathes a different silence now. The white cube walls, no longer quite so stark, reflect a dawn that broke upon my vow to drag the buried sorrows from the dark. Miroir's strange art, its channels now subdued, stands as a testament, a lesson learned. Perception's edge, where nightmares once accrued, is where the brightest, fiercest truths are burned. The locket rests, a silver, silent plea, a memento of a curator's lost fight. Now intertwined with what became of me, weaver of the shadow and the light, the asylum's grief, acknowledged and released, no longer writhes within the gallery's heart. The hungry echoes have been now appeased, transmuted by the truest form of art. Though Thorn may never grasp the depths I faced, and Oakhaven sleeps, unknowing through the night, the gallery's soul, by trauma once embraced, now holds a flicker of a different light. I walk its halls, no longer as the prey, but as a witness, changed by what I've known, that even in the deepest disarray, a human heart can make its courage shown. The rain may fall, the city still may keep its ancient secrets and foundations deep. But when I curate dreams from sorrow's sleep, I'll know the price, the promises to keep. For art's a portal, yes, for joy or dread, a mirror to the soul's unseen design, and I, the curator, who faced the dead, will seek the truth in every color, every line,